Welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. We are joined today by one of our frequent co-hosts, Priya Chaudry. So we're focusing today's discussion on the legal implications and insights pertaining to security and compliance. All that to say is we're just going to let Priya mostly do all the talking because we love what we can hear from her. We're setting it up in the first segment that we're going to talk about a recent legal conference that was put on by U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency. The conference was focused on engaging lawyers to help with understanding the legal and policy complexities of enabling our government to defend critical national security networks and defend the nation, yada, yada, yada. Other topics discussed during this year's conference included challenges posed by foreign influence operations, the difficulty of achieving deterrence in cyberspace, a review of the legal issues related to cyberspace operations in 2020, and a glimpse inside the development of cyber law and policy at the Department of Defense. Priya set us straight on this. In our second segment, we're going to continue the discussion. I posted a couple news stories. You can find them in the show notes. Things like recent congressional hearing on SolarWinds that concluded that we need to update our U.S. cyber law. Cyber law is creeping into various programs at law schools. More and more companies are recognizing the need for law. Hopefully just things to just start the conversation going. So all this today on Security and Compliance Weekly. Join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly.
Welcome to episode 65 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on March 16th, 2021. Happy St. Patrick's Day Eve, everyone. I'm wearing a little bit of green just to get my pre-gaming in. I am, of course, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my illustrious co-hosts, Mr. Scott Lyons, Mr. Josh Marpet, and Ms. Priya Chaudry, Esquire. Happy St. Patrick's Day Eve, everyone.
Happy St. Patrick's Day Eve to you.
So have you already gotten your corned beef on, Jeff?
It's thawing in the refrigerator. It will be prepared tomorrow. So yes.
Nicely done, sir.
And I'm debating whether I run to the liquor store, frankly, and get Guinness or Irish whiskey. I'm kind of leaning towards Irish whiskey, to be honest.
Get both. Make
Why not
some
both?
car bombs.
Exactly.
Yeah, make some car bombs.
What are they? An Irish car bomb?
Yep.
There's probably a joke in there somewhere. Anyway, a couple
Not
of
one we're going to tell on the
before
air. Let's be clear.
Hey, if you want to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly, you can do so by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe, where you can subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher or subscribe on our YouTube channel and sign up for our mailing list. Oh, and also the Discord server, where the conversation has been going for like the last 45 minutes for this show. Also, if you missed Security Weekly Unlocked, you can now access all of the content on demand, whether you registered for the event beforehand or not. Do so by going to securityweekly.com/unlocked and clicking either the button to register or the button to log in. All right, enough of that. So we are excited and delighted and elated to have Priya with us on the show today. Always an engaging conversation. I missed the last one, so I don't even know what we talked about other than it was a great show, and it proves that I'm not really necessary here. Wanted to start off the show with talking about the fact that the government, the U.S. Cyber Command, actually hosts an annual legal conference. And I listened to several of the recordings. I don't know if anybody else of my co-hosts had a chance to listen to them, but they, at least on paper, are covered some interesting topics, but I suspect that Priya has an opinion. So take it away, Priya. What are your thoughts?
I do have an opinion. And last time we talked about you, in case you're wondering. Just kidding.
Oh boy.
So it's interesting. The government, was initially set up in response to being a colony of England. And there's been very little to change that reaction and that structure. And so we have these branches of government that are, the beginning of your show, you talk about silos that are supposed to be independent. And then within those branches, they create agencies which are also supposed to be independent, but sort of interconnected. And that's where we start having problems, because we have several federal agencies that were created well before the first, TI-85 calculator, that are now tasked with being on top of issues that are at light speed in cybersecurity. And then you have some new agencies. And let's say you have 5 different agencies. Each of those is under its own protocol of who it reports to, what it does, and then what it can share. And there are different levels of what it can share. And so part of what happened at this conference is they had to wrap their arms around the fact that cybersecurity is an issue that cannot be understood, regulated, tackled, or defended against in this silo format for lots of reasons. One is that one group might have discovered, let's just say the NSA, Jeff, you seem to have an affection for them, have discovered, let's say, the SolarWinds hack. And let's say they discovered it on March 1st of this month. So let's say they discovered it 14 days ago, 15 days ago. And they discover it, and they're taking their own action by whatever means they're authorized to do. But maybe they're not authorized to tell the other 4 groups that they've discovered this. And maybe they need to do all these bureaucratic steps before they can release this information. Now, the problem is, let's say each bureaucratic step takes a week. You 3 and then your audience understand what happens in that week.
Let's say it takes a month or maybe 3. A week is extremely generous.
Right.
It is. Proceed.
Exactly. And so then you end up with this situation where they're in possession of information that is critical, not just to that agency, but probably the whole country, private sector, public sector, and then probably the world, because we're no longer truly, when it comes to cybersecurity, we're not separate countries, right? There are no borders anymore. All of these issues impact everyone. And it's interesting, the way I sort of think about it is this conference came about because we as a country realized, and one of the talks started with saying, for the past 12 years, the United States has been on the defense, right, and cybersecurity issues. We are reacting to not only what's happening, but most of our time is spent reacting, and this is, almost laughable, to the last attack, right? Figuring out what happened, right? It's like spending your entire, I'm sorry for a sports analogy, it's like spending your entire football season figuring out why you lost in the preseason, right? Instead of, showing up for the game. And so that's where we are. That's where the US is. And because of the way we have siloed off these agencies, and then more importantly, because these agencies are totally independent from the private sector, which is where I would say most of the innovation is happening, and not necessarily even in a concerted way. You do have big organizations like, Microsoft, for example. And then you have all the people out there who are independently doing their own work. And whereas you have the white hat hackers who have a function, the government hasn't figured out that without all of these groups working together, and instead of reinventing wheels 80,000 times a second all over the country, we're not really moving forward. We're not getting up to speed, and we're definitely not getting ahead of the game. So there is no current way to protect against future threats. And that, I think, is what they were acknowledging. They were saying, we're so behind the game that we need to figure out how to integrate these different government agencies and how to balance the risk of sharing secrets, right, with what the cost is of keeping those secrets, right? And then at the same time, how do we integrate these public, the private groups, and then the sort of the cowboy rogue hackers who are maybe even further ahead than private companies. And I think without this, we're absolutely useless. And for me, the best analogy is the coronavirus pandemic, right? I mean, never before in the history of the world has a vaccine been created so fast. And not only did it get created by one group, but within sort of weeks, it got created by groups all over the world who were doing their own research and then who realized they had to share some of their research because there is no win. There's no way for one person to win that race. And as soon as they had the sequence of the coronavirus DNA, overnight, Moderna figured out how to start the vaccine, right? Which is incredible. But that is, I think, the way the world needs to think about cyber security issues. It is coronavirus is kind of amazing because it's mutating, right? It's fighting back. It's ahead of us. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of us. By the time we figured out it's mutated again. And that we can all sort of sit back and have a global view about, right? It's best for all of us if we pool our resources, we break down all secrecy and information silos, and we attack it together as a human race. But somehow cybersecurity, we're not there yet, right? And cybersecurity issues are on every level issues. They do become healthcare issues. They become government issues on election, right? That's part of what they were talking about at the conference is the US has finally acknowledged that in the 2018 and 2020 elections, the only way to have something that looked like a democratic process was to be prepared for the cyber attacks that may come, right? They've just figured out the cyber attacks from 2016 election, right? And so how do we go about the world, for example, saying, let's spread democracy when we can't ensure our own because we are not up to snuff on how our, quote, enemies are going to attack us and try to disassemble the very fabric of what's keeping this country strong and together. So I just thought that this conference is the beginning, hopefully, of what would be a reckoning saying we need to think about these issues in a completely different way. And, just that there's a World Health Organization and the UN. I mean, these are global issues that require global cooperation, which will also require, like Interpol, deciding blank are bad actors, right? Like Russia has to get on board and say, we're interested in investigating and prosecuting our own hackers, even though those hackers press a political advantage for Russia sometimes, right? Or China.
Yeah, well, if they were going to do that, if they were going to do that, then they'd also have to go after North Korea, I think it is, because allegedly Russia a couple of years ago owned all of the command and control servers that North Korea was using for its botnets and have been propagating malcode campaigns using those servers. So, where's the fine line on the double-edged sword of, do we go after our own people and say no, or do we promote our agenda while still going after our people and saying no, or do we turn a blind eye to it all?
Yeah, those are all the great questions raised, because the truth is, if we promote our own agenda, we become limited by our resources, right? And as soon as you start, there's no difference between the space race, right? Like, why is there a space race? right? If the people leading the space race sat down in a room together, they could have gone to space 4 years earlier, right? But you're limited by your knowledge and by your own bureaucracy, and we are not going to win. Like the U.S. isn't going to win, partially because we have Jeff might have a different view of this, a set of rules that we are playing by, right? And we're in like a UFC fight in cyber world with people who don't have rules, right? And who don't care what our rules are, have not signed up for those rules, are not abiding by those rules, and therefore they can get ahead. And their getting ahead is directly at our cost.
So I have a couple comments.
A lot of information.
You've spewed a lot at us. To put things a little bit in context, I used to work for NSA. I was at NSA mid 80s to mid 90s, and I was there at the very beginnings of internet security, ethical hacking, what came to be known as red teaming. And when we were first starting to look into internet security and computer security and ethical hacking, and if and how NSA could do something like that back in the early 90s, and this is just sort of historical context, the prevailing law that our general counsel pointed to govern what we wanted to do was the Communications Act of 1934.
Mm-hmm.
And we were almost, you heard me right.
Oh, the wiretap laws.
The wiretap laws of 1934 which were the closest things on the books at the time that any of our lawyers and general counsel, and I think this was also in the private sector too, could point to and say, this kind of remotely relates to all this new stuff that's happening on the internet. I mostly agree with your observations and conclusions concerning the government and the National Security Agency. I think it's worse than that. In the context of, again, when I was at NSA was the only game in town. They did crypto, they did secure communications for everybody. They protected everything security, data security related for the government and government interests. And that was mostly built on military tactics that date back 1,000 years. And you referred to the fact that the internet is borderless. We have no countries, but countries fighting, countries trying to seek power in history were basically land grabs. Looking for natural resources, whether it was agriculture or mineral wealth or
people
later
that they were going to grab.
People.
Yes.
It was all about the land grab. I don't personally see, with the exception of a few things around Russia, maybe, and you got the North-South Korea thing. I don't see
Russia.
land grabs and redrawing borders as something that anybody thinks is a large threat in the future. The world has changed. What people are trying to accomplish in terms of gaining wealth and power are changing. It's much more blatantly economic these days. It's always been economic related, but I think the government and all of us, frankly, because I'm not saying I have an answer, are clueless when it comes to rethinking what's the grab of the future when we've been accustomed to it being a certain way in the past.
So I'm going to
just
disagree on that point a little bit, because I think the land grab, the land was just the fill-in for resource/power, right? And resources are what people have always wanted, whether that is money or some other sort of wealth, because that is how you get power in this world. And so I read. I'm going to apologize on many fronts, but I read a book a few years ago, written by Bill Clinton, ex-President Bill Clinton, and someone else, and it was called "The President is Missing." I don't know if any of you have read this book, but it was sort of a mind-blowing book because it's written from all the insider knowledge of someone who ran the country for 8 years and knows where like the secret rooms are and how shit really happens. Sorry, but the premise of the book is it starts with a hack, and the U.S. government has been hacked, and the hackers have let the president know this has happened. And what they did is they went first into the LA County water system, and they turned off the filtration, so none of the water became drinkable, right? And that's how the outside threat showed that we really did this, and we have power. And it was sort of the way they took hostages. They started quickly, they figured out what the infrastructure was, like how the hospital structure would respond, what emergency structures, if any, were there to respond to this emergency that they created and could create at the click of a button, right? And that is sort of what drove the book. And at the time, I was like, whoa, this is, and this is actually something Bill Clinton has been talking about forever, that this is the threat. This is how the next land grab happens, is that somebody just gets into the, LA County, Chicago, New York City subway system infrastructure and decides, I'm going to make all the subway trains smash into each other until you do whatever it is I tell you to, right? And that's how you paralyze and cripple a group. You start cutting off powers to hospitals, right? You cut off their generators, and suddenly you have an absolute crisis. You start draining people's bank accounts, right? How are people going to ever explain or prove that 15 minutes before someone pushed that button, I had $20 million in that? Who wouldn't say that, $20 million in that account?
Hiker, 50 or 100 million. I'll go all the way. Come on.
Exactly. I love that to you. That's all the way, 100 million. The people who really have money are like, I don't know, maybe I have $15 billion. So yeah, exactly. But this method of going in and basically slowly suffocating the government's favorite children, right, in front of their eyes, is the way to resource grab, right? You can get, oh my God, in the book, part of the political advantage that the group was going for, one, they were going for money, right? It was a straight up hostage taking. We will start killing off your cities until you give us money. Another was until you, let's take Israel-Palestine. Let's say a group involved that wanted a certain result in that region came in and took Chicago hostage, right? So easy to do. Turn off all the power, turn off the water, reverse the filtration system in the water so that people are now being poisoned, cancel all the emergency communication so that you can't get FEMA in there. You've log jammed it all. And they say, look, until the US does the X, Y, and Z, signs this accord, agrees, whatever, we're just going to keep going. Look, there is so much to be gained by being ahead in this race politically. That's the new figurative land grab, right? It's really endless when you start thinking about what someone else could do. Look what happens with just one company when they get hacked, right? One hospital system, they're concerned that the health records of their people are out there. Imagine that on a scale that's, exponentially bigger.
Right, but isn't CFAA supposed to protect us from all things that go bump on the network?
Yeah, it's done a great job. Fine. Yes, there are laws that are in place, but it's like by the time, look, the legal system, as I've said to you guys before, is reactive, and it was invented at a time when people took a horse buggy to court, right? Like waiting 3 months for a decision was no big deal when the only thing you were doing in that time is, growing food and trying not to die of the plague. it still takes about that long, right? And now that's ridiculous. What are you going to do? The residents of LA are going to file a class action against Russia? Like, okay, great. By then they've been poisoned, right? Their children are irrevocably damaged from this cyber terror attack. And also the CFAA doesn't really cross the borders, the fake borders from the internet, right? Like what North Korea.
Fake borders? Those political borders are fake? Oh my God. I thought those lines on the map were big walls and stuff.
I wouldn't say fake. I would say artificial.
I thought it was aluminum foil, right? That they were building walls on the borders and it went up to the space. And that's how you could stop people from cyber attacking.
Space borders.
I know I just spewed a lot again, but
you're okay. Back up a step. You're talking about it's 16 categories of critical infrastructure. It was 17. Now it's 16 categories of critical infrastructure. You're talking about,
What, did the government lose one?
No, they consolidated 2 of them, I think. So there are only 16 now. I believe that's what happened. If I'm wrong, somebody call me out. But you're
wrong.
You're talking about
just like PCI. No, I'm just messing. I can help that.
PCI is wrong? What's wrong with you, man? PCI is all
2 and
PCI.
3,
PCI
so that way we get the PCI bells for the day.
All right, no. In all seriousness, you're talking about the critical infrastructure categories. You're talking about cyber attack as transposed or as transmuted into the real world. And a lot of times we find that cyber attacks in the real world are possible. I mean, we just had the sodium hydroxide incident in good Lord, what state was that? On that water treatment plant?
Florida.
Was that Florida? Okay, thank you. Couldn't remember. Yeah. And
not
so,
a state,
but it's all a lie.
It's a state of being.
No. Sodium hydroxide is lie. So
nice.
Thank you. Little chemistry joke. Yeah. But no, in all seriousness, it's very rare and very difficult for those attacks to cross over into the real world. For example, Stuxnet, which was, what year was Stuxnet? Anybody? Bueller?
13 maybe?
Okay, 2013. So that's
no. First uncovered in 2010. Thought to have been in development since 2005. Jeff.
Okay.
Was it 2010?
Wow. I can neither confirm nor deny.
It took him 5 years.
Jeff, did you make it? Is that why they asked you?
He did all of it. So
yes, it should have been called the man virus.
Stuxnet was an attack on critical infrastructure of another country, done by some very, very serious people, but a place that makes puzzles, some palace anyway. And they built this to attack real world critical infrastructure, and it worked, and it did a great job. But it was such an incredible, it was damn near a Manhattan Project, if you will, in the cyber world. So today it's probably a hell of a lot easier, 2010. So 11 years later, it's probably a lot easier to do, as we saw with just TeamViewer being left open. We're also seeing the, a lot more attacks on smaller arenas, smaller areas, smaller companies, smaller groups, smaller agencies, because, look, they're easy to get into. They don't have the money, the time, the effort for that kind of security. I mean, for God's sakes, this place had TeamViewer running, and everybody, TeamViewer. And Jim Gilson last week talked about how, look, guys, you're talking about places that don't have the budget for anything, and if they want the budget for some of this stuff, they've got to do a bond issue, they've got to do a rate hike, they've got to do something, and it's almost impossible to get this stuff across. So, when you're talking about all of these attacks and all of the attacks that could be on critical infrastructure, and then Scott brings up CFAA and how it's supposed to protect us, that's USC 1029 and 1030, I think, and you're seeing the disconnects, and now we go back to silos. Yeah, silos. There we go. Okay, I got it around the bend there. Silos.
You went around the silo.
We see the interaction.
Forget tearing them down. Let's just walk around it.
Let's just walk around.
Now you've got the interaction between the silo of law and the speed or lack thereof at which law operates, technology. And
speaking of law,
Go
if
for
I
it.
may cut you off, Josh,
That's okay.
bringing this back to the umbrella of the discussion today, what can the law do about this? Does the law have the potential for helping or hindering?
Yeah, both, unfortunately. So, as I was reading through those articles, I thought, well, there has to be a specialty within law for this that is more like the patent bar. So for all lawyers, if you finish law school, you take the bar, you can be an attorney in whatever state that you've passed the bar. But if you want to be a patent lawyer, you have to pass the patent bar, which is separate and much harder, and you have to have a prior degree in a science. And because you have to be able to fundamentally understand the really complicated things happening. I mean, for me in my practice, I don't require that. I try to become a subject matter expert on whatever I'm dealing with, but it's not the same as in patent law. And I was thinking about this, and then I read about the USC program of the Masters of Law, and I was thinking, you really need, for the law to help, you need people who are like the three of you to get a legal education, right? Because you can't actually take existing lawyers and train them to the level where all of you are trained and make them experts in the same way. So I think you need to go the opposite route, where you start, I mean, whether it's aptitude or interest, like there's a difference. I've spent 21 years practicing law. You all have spent that in the computer world, right? And to be relevant in your world, you have to, you have like a weekly podcast. Probably the three of you and your audience spend a part of every single day learning, right? Staying up to date, and not just learning, but probably also trying to get ahead, probably trying to create, trying to anticipate, right? That's not something a lawyer can do on their own, because unless that is the only thing you do, you can't actually practice, right? You need to actually stop and do your job as a lawyer.
Well,
so what you would need is people like you who either become lawyers, either with that master's type thing, so that you can get the foundation and understand how, like, regulation, compliance, how laws are passed, right? And you can understand, okay, if we want a law that is going to do X, then this is what it would take to make that happen. And this is how we influence the policymakers to say, we need to change the procedure, because if we actually want to stay current or ahead of it, then this field, because of its lightning pace, has to be treated differently than traditional law, which, if you guys remember the cartoon of, like, I'm just a bill, like, how something becomes a law. That's a long process.
I don't just remember it, I live by it.
Can you sing it?
Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. But to your point, Priya,
okay, we're not the Smothers Brothers on this show.
No, we're the Andrews sisters.
Oof.
I'm not that flexible.
What I'm hearing you say, Priya, is similar to the way the military and the DoD is, and defense is by nature looking back. But that's the essence of law. I mean, nobody wants to take a stand on interpreting any new laws or things that they encounter. They're always looking at the precedent and what's been done in the past. I'm hearing it's a very similar problem. And what I'm hearing you say is, within the legal community, we need to have hackers that are able to hack and introduce the idea of how to look forward and anticipate. It's not just learning, but it's which is important. And I think all of us and all of our listeners, we continue to learn. It's just that's part of the nature of what we do. That needs to transcend Probably into both areas, into the law and into the government and the DoD as well. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that when there are articles, whether it's the people doing the autopsy on SolarWinds or people in general just saying like how in light of COVID and the fact that every company went to remote and very few of those companies were prepared or even thought about what the cybersecurity challenges are of suddenly having all of their employees on their home wireless network, whether or not they're secure, on whether it's TeamViewer or Zoom or FaceTime or whatever they're doing, using their personal computers, and no one was prepared for that, right? And so people are saying, well, everyone agrees that companies need to invest more in that sort of infrastructure and that security. Do you hire outside counsel because there'll be specialists? Do law firms grow that department? But I don't know how a law firm grows that department today, and in a year that department is still relevant and the best without having these specialized sort of hybrid people, right, who are learning and evolving and anticipating. And I think it should require a special certification, like the patent bar, right? Like if you want to be a cybersecurity lawyer, you can't be like a joker like me who reads a bunch of articles and talks about it sometimes and has done a couple cases, and therefore I know exactly what those issues are in that case from 2019. Like, why would you hire me in 2021, right? I'm not a computer person. I won't know what this is about. You need right? You need people like you who then get that added layer on training, because the legal training is very different. You learn the law sort of once, right? Then you practice law. And I have to take continuing legal education, but it is, let me tell you, it is not the same as what I would have to if I were at if I was at the world's best computer hacking company. I'm guessing that they wouldn't let me in on my degree and then never quiz me again, right? Or never quiz me every few months, or just watch my work and go, you're so out of date, right? So
let's do this, Priya. Let's take a quick break because we're sort of shifting gears into the second half of the conversation anyway. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll carry on with the conversation. Stay tuned.